So we're going to start Parashat Vaetchanan, and we're going to do, I would like to focus actually on two different sections of the parasha that are of great significance. One of them we'll go over in more detail, which is the very, very interesting mitzvah not to add onto the mitzvot. The very interesting mitzvah not to add or subtract from the mitzvot. And what exactly does that mean? We want to get into that a little bit. But first, at the beginning of the parasha, Vaetchanan means I prayed, I supplicated. The English here is I implored Hashem at that time. So Moshe Rabbeinu was begging Hashem, Hashem Elohim, ata achilot l'harot et avdech godlecha. You have started to show me your greatness and your strong hand. Asher miyel b'shamayim u'ba'aretz asher ya'asechem ma'asecha b'chigvurotecha ebra na v'ir'eh et ha'aretz hatova shebe'ever ha'yarden ha'ar hatov hazeh v'ha'lebanon. Please let me cross over and see the good land that is on the other side of the Yarden, the good mountain, and the Lebanon. So Moshe Rabbeinu is making an appeal to Hashem to allow him to cross over the Yarden, even though up till now the understanding has been that Moshe Rabbeinu is not allowed to go. So why all of a sudden is Moshe Rabbeinu praying to be able to go? What's up till now he hasn't said anything. He says, Ba'etahi, at that time, I prayed to Hashem. What's that time? What time are we talking about? What time are we talking about? Well, what was last week's parasha? What did we leave off with? We left off with Moshe Rabbeinu describing what? Does anybody remember the end of Parashat Devarim? Guys, we just read it last week. Tisha B'Av wiped everybody's memory banks clean, huh? We forgot everything. It talks about the Milchemet Og Melech HaBashan, the Milchemet Sichon, the war against Sichon and Og, and the capturing of that land, the giving of that land to Reuven and Gad, the two tribes that want the land, and of course the half of Menashe, which is a whole other story. And then the conclusion is that Moshe Rabbeinu says to Yehoshua, again, at that time, what is ba'etahi in our parasha referring back to? It's referring to the same ba'etahi that Moshe Rabbeinu was mentioning at the end of Devarim. Ba'etahi means at that time, after the conclusion of the war of Sichon and Og, and after I divided the land and I bequeathed the land, if you will, to Reuven and Gad, at that time I prayed to Hashem. Just like at that time it says, I commanded Yehoshua and told him, just like Hashem has done to these kings, He's going to do to all the kings in Canaan when you go into Eretz Canaan. Right? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu had told Yehoshua after those wars. Because remember, a big part of why the Jewish people are so afraid to go into the land of Israel, and a big part of what caused the Chet HaMeraglim, what caused the sin of the spies, is that the Jews have been on the passive end of receiving a lot of chasadim, a lot of support, a lot of kindness, a lot of miracles. But to go in and risk your life and engage in battle against a foreign power that's much, much more, much better prepared than you are, and better armed than you are, is a dangerous proposition. And they don't have any kind of memory of doing anything like that. Yes, Hashem brought plagues on the Mitzrayim and they ran away, but they didn't have to fight the Mitzrayim. They didn't have to take swords and fight against the Mitzrayim. So they don't have confidence that they're going to be able to do that in the land of Israel. So what happens with Og and Sichon is, for the first time, they picked up arms and they actually fought, defeated very, very powerful armies, the most powerful in the whole region, and captured their land. It's actually remarkable. When we read it and we read all the details, they took 60 cities, Shishim Ir Kol Chevel Argov, Mamlechet Og Babashan, all of these things we read about, and we're like, 60 cities. 60 cities? That's a lot of cities. For a group of Jews that have been wandering in the desert for 38 years and they never fought a war in their life. How did they capture 60 cities protected by the most sophisticated armies that existed at that time? The most formidable and fear-inducing armies of that time, and somehow this group of Jews wandering in the desert came and defeated them completely when nobody else was capable of doing it. It's pretty remarkable. It's pretty amazing. But we don't focus on those those battle stories. We don't tend to focus on the details, but they really accomplished a tremendous amount, and now have the confidence that, hey, we can go into Canaan and we can do the same thing. Up till now, we weren't sure. We didn't have this sense of confidence that we had never seen anything like that we would enter into a battle and actually be victorious when the odds were stacked against us. They're usually being saved out of trouble. Okay, they're starving, Hashem brings man. They're thirsty, Hashem brings water. They're enslaved, Hashem brings the makot to free them. But to go and engage in battle and assume that Hashem is going to be on your side is a totally different story. They defended themselves against Amalek. Okay. But this time they go and basically ask for trouble from Og and Sichon, pretty much, and get themselves involved in a battle and conquer territory, which is really amazing. So at that very same time, Moshe Rabbeinu pleads with Hashem to allow him to go into the land of Israel. So what do you think induced Moshe? Why ba'etahi? Why at that very time did Moshe Rabbeinu raise the question or make his appeal to the Supreme Court for a different sentence? He's supposed to die in the Midbar and not go into the land of Israel. He says, I want to cross over and see the good land that you're giving. Is he now trying to be an Indian giver and take back Yehoshua's position of leadership? He just said, Ba'etahi tziveti, Ba'etahi, right before this, at the end of Devarim, he says that Ve'et Yehoshua tziveti ba'etahi, that I told Yehoshua, you're going to be able to accomplish the same thing. So then why would he then pray to Hashem? So he's speaking out of two sides of his mouth. He's telling Yehoshua, you're going to be great. But then he says to Hashem, hey Hashem, can I really be the one that goes over? On the side, he's having a side conversation with Hashem. That's not what it means. What is Moshe Rabbeinu saying? He's saying, you showed me the beginning of your great salvation that you're going to do. I want to see the end of the process. I don't want to be the leader. I want to come along as an observer. I want to see it. I want to be able to see the providence of Hashem come in and fulfill the promise to Avraham Avinu that all of these nations are going to be removed and that they're going to be replaced with the Am Kadosh. I want to see it. I want to witness it with my own eyes. What an amazing thing to see. And Hashem says, sorry, no. But what was it that made Moshe Rabbeinu think he might have a chance at winning on this appeal? What do you think the reason? Right, so Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who led them in the war against Og and Sichon. So in a way, Moshe Rabbeinu started the process of conquering Israel because they annexed the territory of Og and Sichon to Israel. So in a way, Moshe Rabbeinu did participate in the taking of the land of Israel, the extension of the land of Israel, right? The occupied territories, if you will. Okay? The Og and Sichon territories. So because of that, he feels, hey, I wasn't anticipating being able to participate in any part of this. So the fact that I was able to participate in this, maybe I can also come along and see the completion of my work. I started the work. I saw this happen. I want to see the completion of it. And so he felt maybe there was an opening to request more. But he's asking it from a perspective not of wanting to be the leader. He wants to be able to see he wants to be able to see the Nisim v'Niflaot of Hashem that he's going to do.
Isn't this like a very selfish thing Moshe wants so badly? Like, why does he care so much?
Okay, why does Moshe care so much about going into land and seeing it, you mean?
Yeah. Like, I don't know. It seems like I'm somebody
Why would it be selfish? He's not taking away from anybody else selfish, you don't mean that.
No, not that he's taking from someone else, but it's kind of like, it's not a physical thing, but it's like, for someone on Moshe's level, it seems like it shouldn't be that big a deal.
Sort of like Hashem gave him his road, he completed his role, now he's asking
for more. Well, I guess we could look at it this way. The person who is, like the Rambam says, someone who's Ohev Hashem, someone who loves Hashem and has great knowledge of Hashem, always seeks more knowledge of Hashem. And in fact, he says something very interesting in Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, which nobody learns. In Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, we're talking about all the astronomy. Right? Yeah, it's very hard. I'm not criticizing people for not learning it. I'm just saying nobody learns it. So what does the Rambam say? He says that somebody who really loves knowledge of Hashem would yearn to understand these subjects. They're so profound. Everybody wants to know the details of the astronomy and how it works out for Kiddush HaChodesh. So a person who has an insatiable desire to understand the Darchei Hashem will want, as part of his exploration and discovery of the ways of Hashem, he wants the opportunity to have this knowledge because he has a yearning for Yediat Hashem at the highest level. Not because he personally wants to be the one credited with it. I'm fine with not getting the credit. I just want to see it so I can understand how is Hashem going to bring this about. It's part of it's completing my knowledge of God. And you see that's what he's saying. Because he's saying, Har'ot et avdecha et godlecha. You started showing me your greatness, your mighty hand, that there's none else like you, and now I want to see how is that going to be actualized in this world. It's part of my knowledge of Hashem. Just like a person, like the Rambam says, a person who studies Kiddush HaChodesh, or a person who has the opportunity and loves the knowledge of Hashem, will yearn for those mathematical equations of Kiddush HaChodesh. He wants to understand every nuance of how Hashem put the world together. I think that's the reason. It's coming from his Ahavat Hashem. He wants to understand Hashem at the highest level. And unfortunately, Hashem tells him, you want to see? Fine. He tells him, go up to the mountain, you'll see it. So basically what Moshe Rabbeinu receives in the end is the opportunity to see. It's really a mar'eh nevu'ah, by the way. The vision that Moshe Rabbeinu sees at the end of the Torah is not that he physically saw the land of Israel. He couldn't have physically seen the entire land of Israel from one observation point. That is impossible. What he did was, he saw b'mar'eh nevuah. He saw in a prophetic vision the ideal, settled dream of Eretz Yisrael. At that moment, he got to see everything prophetically, but he doesn't physically get to see it. So he misses out on being able to perceive it, close up, to be able to see, the level that he was yearning for. But he gets to at least be able to envision the final product of Eretz Yisrael settled by the Jewish people that he wanted to see. So, even though it's in advance, he's seeing it in a prophetic vision. But there's also another element to this mention of Moshe that he is praying to Hashem, which is that we could see that the Jewish people are standing on the brink of a very, very anxiety-inducing stage of life. They're about to go into the unknown, the great unknown. They're about to be subjected to or made vulnerable to war and violence and resistance. And at that very time, what did Moshe just talk about? He just talked about Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, and how they wanted to stay on the other side of the Jordan. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu said to them, you can do that, but only provided that you come over to the land of Israel with us, and you fight with us, and you settle it with us, and then you go back. And why did he do that? What was the reason? Why? What was the concern if they didn't do that?
They would have had no love for the hearts. They wouldn't fall in love with the land like their brothers did. That's
true. They wouldn't get to see the land. That's definitely true. And that is one of the problems. One of the problems is a lack of connection to Israel and to Kiddushat Eretz Yisrael and all that. But there was also a problem of morale, right? Problem of morale. The army is going to say, hey, these guys are very strong guys. They're staying back, Maybe there's something to be worried about. We also want to stay back. We also want to stay with them. Why should we have to go in? Why should we have to go fight? They're afraid. So if you are a Jew living at this time, and Moshe Rabbeinu says to you, okay, now it's time to go into Israel. Don't worry. You're going to be able to defeat the 31 kings, and you're going to handily defeat them and settle the land, no problem. No worries. And don't be afraid. Don't be nervous. Even Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven are going with you. So you have nothing to be afraid of. And they say, okay, Moshe, what about you? I'm gonna stop here, actually. My career ends here. What do you mean your career ends here? What about, don't you want to come with us? What's the problem? Are you afraid? Is that why you're ending your career, early retirement here? So there's always a sense of Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to explain many things in the parasha. One thing he's trying to explain in Parashat Devarim is, why did it take them so long to get to this point, right? Which is what he explains. But now he's trying to explain, why am I giving you a farewell speech when you've got a lot more work ahead of you? And the answer is, I tried, I prayed to God. Don't think it's because I didn't want to go. I prayed to God, I begged, I pleaded, I implored, I did all of those things, and Hashem said, no, you can't go. And I said, can I at least go see? No, you can't even go see. So obviously Moshe Rabbeinu, he's telling us this, first of all, to tell us that you should never give up. When a person has something l'shem shamayim that they want to make a request of Hashem, they should never give up until they're told to stop. There's nothing wrong with praying and looking for opportunities, looking for opportunities to pray, and should pray, for, like Rashi says, matanat chinam, should ask for it not based on my zechut, but because I'm doing it l'shem shamayim. I wanted l'shem shamayim. That's a good enough reason. But the other reason that he's telling us this is to show us And also to show us the Ahavat Hashem that he had, that Moshe Rabbeinu, the desire to know and to understand Hashem was so great that he wanted to see all of these details. But he also wants to show you that it wasn't for lack of love or lack of enthusiasm that he didn't come into the land of Israel. Because it's easy to say, well, you didn't let Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad off the hook, but you let yourself off the hook. So he says, no, I did everything. I begged to be able to go. I wasn't allowed to go. What am I going to do? I had no choice. So then he says, and now we're going to go to Perek Daled. Now Perek Daled introduces what might be considered the meat and potatoes more of Sefer Devarim, because a lot of this is a prologue of Sefer Devarim, telling us the history, everything that's happened. And of course there's going to be more prologue, because he's going to talk about Matan Torah, he's going to talk about Chet HaEgel, of course, and he's going to talk about other things, but he's getting closer to talking about the actual mitzvot. Okay? Now, incidentally, at the end of Gimel, I should mention, it says, "V'tzaved Yoshua v'chazekeu v'yametzeu, ki hu ya'avor lefnei ha'am hazeh v'yanchil otam et ha'aretz asher tireh." You should tell Yoshua not to be afraid that this is going to happen to him too, that he's also going to be fired. He's not going to be fired. He's definitely going to make it in. Because you could imagine that Yoshua would lose some of his morale from the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was staying behind. What is he going to think? Well, if Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest person ever pretty much, is not able to make it into the land of Israel, how am I going to be worthy of coming into the land of Israel? How am I, Yehoshua, going to possibly have the zechut or find favor in the eyes of Hashem to be able to come in? It seems like a very remote possibility if Moshe Rabbeinu, Adon HaNevi'im, was incapable of coming in. So therefore, so that's why Hashem tells Moshe, encourage him, strengthen him, tell him not to worry. He will indeed make it. He's going to make it in. He shouldn't be afraid. Okay, he shouldn't have to worry. So then we get to Ve'ata Yisrael, and now Israel. Shema lachukim v'ala mishpatim, asher anochi melamed etchem la'asot. This is Pasuk Aleph, Perek Daled. This is page 958. So, and now Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments that I teach you to do today. Leman techyu, so you will live, uvatem v'yishtem et haaretz, and you will come in and you will inherit the land. Asher Hashem Elohei avotechem noten lechem, that Hashem, the God of your forefathers, is giving to you. Lo tosifu ala davar asher nochi metzaveh etchem. Don't add onto what Hashem commands you. Velo tigra'u mimenu, and don't subtract from it. Lishmor et mitzvot Hashem Elohechem asher anochi metzaveh etchem. To keep the mitzvot of Hashem your God that I'm commanding you, that I'm informing you of. Okay? So, one question that has to be understood, and that the Mefarshim try to flesh out, and the Gemara talks about it in many places, is what does it mean to add on to the mitzvot? Let's say, for example, I wake up one day and I decide that it would really mean a lot to me if there was a mitzvah to burn the New York Times every morning. I don't know why. It's just something I decided I wanted to do. So, and I decided that's going to be the 614th mitzvah. Is that lo tosifu al mitzvot? Is that considered adding on to the mitzvot of Hashem? I'm putting that out as a question to ponder. Okay, what does it mean to subtract a mitzvah? Let's say I simply don't do a mitzvah. I decide that shatnez is too hard to keep. You have to have the suits checked, and it's difficult. I cancel. I'm not going to keep the mitzvah of shatnez. I respect the people who keep it, but I'm not going to keep it. Is that subtracting from the Torah? So these are questions. It's not entirely clear. What does it mean to add? What does it mean to subtract? So the Gemara gives us some examples and says, for instance, let's say you have the lulav. The lulav is made up of how many species? There are 4. It's called arba'at haminim, right? Let's say a person puts the lulav, they put the etrog, hadassim, aravot, and they say, I personally really like roses. I like roses. So I decided I'm going to have chameshet haminim, like you have chameshet haminim are the type of grains, right? Chameshet haminim. 5 is also a good number. I'm going to have 5 minim on Sukkot. I think it will look very pretty. Everything is green in the lulav and etrog and yellow. How about a little red? Take some roses, put them in. That's a nice idea. Florists would be very happy in the Jewish neighborhoods, right? So that's the example that they give of Bal Tosif. In other words, you're doing the mitzvah, and you're adding something into the mitzvah. You're adding an element into the mitzvah. Okay? That's what they mean by when they talk about adding. Now, what does it mean to subtract from a mitzvah? What does it mean to subtract? So, let's say a person puts on tefillin with only 3 parashiot, or they decide that they're going to have only 3 corners of their garment have tzitzit instead of 4. Is that diminishing the mitzvah? That's an example that Rashi gives here, actually. Rashi says, when he says to add, the example that he gives for adding is, 5 parashiyot batfilin, 5 minim balulav, 5 tzitziot, v'chen velo tigra'u. The same with subtracting, meaning if you had only 3 minim, you said, aravot, they don't do anything for me. Lulav, it's very prominent. I can't take away the lulav. Etrog smells very nice, and you make jam out of it afterwards, so I'm not going to take away that. Hadassim have a nice fragrance, but aravot, they don't do anything. They just sit there, and they wilt. Right? They're the most difficult ones to keep. So you know what? I'm going to take the aravot out. I'm just going to have 3 minim. That's lo tigra'u, Rashi says. So what's the only problem with that? Can anybody see a problem with defining that as not as subtracting from the Torah? Right, so how do I differentiate between not doing the mitzvah and subtracting from the mitzvah? I mean, if I take 3 minim, there's no such mitzvah. I'm just not doing the mitzvah. Or if I put on tefillin with only 3 parashiyot, I'm just not doing the mitzvah. I'm not subtracting from a mitzvah, because as soon as I'm not doing it anymore, there is no mitzvah to subtract from. So how do I differentiate between that and a guy who just doesn't shake the lulav at all? He subtracted all 4 of the minim. Right? Is he doing? Is he subtracting from the Torah? So it's not clear. How do we draw a line, right, between subtracting, adding to the Torah? We could see somebody innovates something. They bring a new thing in. They decide that there's going to be roses in the lulav together with the other 4 minim. That's adding for sure. But subtracting, once you subtract, you're simply not doing the mitzvah any longer. So how do we call that subtracting from the mitzvah? It's no different than not doing it. So this is one of the problems that plagues many of the Rishonim. They really struggle with this issue of how do you exactly define subtracting from a mitzvah. Okay, now let's go a little bit further. And then we're going to see some really novel approach to this whole concept from Harambam. Okay, but hold on to your hats, if you have any. Or your kippot. Okay? Here's the follow-up. So after we hear not to add and not to subtract, by the way, there's a good story. There's a very good story to illustrate this. There's a story about a guy who comes to his neighbor. He knocks on the neighbor's door and he says, I'd like to borrow a frying pan. He says, okay. Is it meat or milk? Meat? Okay, so he lends him a meat frying pan. The next week he comes back with the same frying pan and a little frying pan, and he gives them back 2. He says, why is there a little frying pan? He says, the large frying pan, it had a baby, Mazal Tov, you have now 2. Oh, okay. The neighbor says, can I borrow, while I'm here, a candlestick? I need candlesticks. He says, sure, no problem. He gives him a candlestick. Comes back the next week with the candlestick and also a little candlestick. He says, what is the little candlestick? He says, Mazal Tov, the candlestick, it had a baby. Now you have 2. Very nice. He says, I was wondering, I'm having a dinner party next week with a lot of people coming over, and I'd like to you have a very fancy chandelier in your dining room. Would you mind if I borrowed the chandelier? Because I would like to have a nice fancy dinner party. He said, sure, no problem. Borrow the chandelier. He's probably thinking I'm going to get another one, so I might as well. He lends him the chandelier. A week goes by, the guy never shows up. Another week goes by, he never comes back with the chandelier. Eventually, the neighbor goes over to his friend. He knocks on the door. He says, hey, I lent you my frying pan. You brought it back the next week. I lent you my candlestick. You brought it back the next week. I lent you my chandelier. What happened to my chandelier? He said, well, remember how the frying pan had a baby and it had a baby frying pan? Yeah. Remember how the candlestick that I lent you, it had a baby candlestick? Yeah, I remember. He said, well, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, your chandelier died. So, what's the point of the story? Kola Mosif Gorea. Once you start adding, once you stretch the imagination and start believing that your frying pan and your candlestick are having babies, you can also believe that the chandelier died, which basically means the guy kept it, So that's the lesson behind it is, any addition or subtraction that doesn't belong can be a problem. Even in addition. Because everybody always asks, what's wrong with adding on to the Torah? You're doing more. Right? You're doing more. But the point is, when you're doing something that's not in accordance with the Torah, you're already thinking out of the box of the Torah. It doesn't matter if it's an addition or subtraction, right? But let's see what happens next in the parasha. We're going to come to a very interesting thing of the Rambam. It's a very famous thing, but it's really, really interesting. He says, the Torah says, this is page 960, that you all saw what happened with Baal Peor, that anybody who followed Baal Peor, Hashem, wiped him out. But you, who are cleaving to Hashem your God, you're alive today. Behold, or look, I have taught you statutes and judgments like Hashem commanded me to do them. You should guard them and you should do them. What does Rashi say? What is ushmartem? It means zom mishnah. This means you should study the mitzvot. Va'asitem, and then you should do them. Because this is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of all the peoples of the world. Because they're going to say, what a wise and understanding nation it is that keeps these mitzvot. Unbelievable. Because what nation has God so close to it like this nation? And what nation has such righteous laws that they follow like this nation? But then in verse 9 he says, Rak yishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od, pen tishkach et advarim asher ro'o einecha, ufen yasuru milevavecha kol yemei chayecha, ve'odatam levanecha ve'levnei vanecha. Then he says, be careful and guard your soul very much, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest it leave your heart all the days of your life. And you should make it known to your children and grandchildren. What is it supposed to be made known? Yom asher amadta lifnei Hashem Elohecha b'chorev. The day that you stood before Hashem at Mount Sinai. And then it goes into somewhat of a recounting of the Ma'amad Har Sinai. So how did we get from a discussion of not adding or subtracting from the mitzvot, or adding on to the mitzvot, subtracting from them, to the wisdom of the mitzvot and how all the nations are going to praise you, to not forgetting Ma'amad Har Sinai. So Rashi says something very interesting. He says that Pen tishkach et hadvarim. This is Rashi of Tet. Rashi on Pasuk 9. אז כשלא תשכחו אותם ותעשום על אמיתתם תחשבו חכמים ונבונים ואם תעוותו אותם מתוך שכחה תחשבו שוטים. This is the most interesting thing. One of the most interesting things that Rashi says. What does he say? If you forget the mitzvot and you do them out of forgetfulness, in other words, you do them the wrong way because you forget, then what's going to happen? The nations of the world are going to think you're fools. If you do them correctly, the nations of the world are going to say what wise and understanding people they are. So in other words, if you study properly and you don't forget the mitzvot, and you do them the right way, then the nations of the world are going to say, what an impressive people. But if you do them the wrong way, if you forget, because you're not paying attention, you're not focusing, you're not studying, then what's going to happen? The nations of the world are going to say you're fools. What's the only difficulty with this? How can they tell the difference? How do the nations of the world know what the right halakha is? They know it better than us? That means they must know it better than us. Because if we forgot it, they're saying, what fools, they forgot the mitzvot. How do they know what the mitzvot are? How are they going to be able to tell? Isn't that a valid question? Moreover, what is the pasuk actually saying that it doesn't want you to forget? Ma'amad Har Sinai. It says, don't forget Ma'amad Har Sinai. In fact, the Ramban here jumps on Rashi and says, that's not what it's telling you not to forget. It's not telling you not to forget the mitzvot. It's telling you not to forget Ma'amad Har Sinai. So what do you mean, Rashi, if you do them the right way? First of all, how are the nations of the world going to know if you're doing it right or wrong? They know how to put on tefillin. They know how to observe Shabbat. Oh, look, they're not observing Shabbat correctly. How are they going to know that whether we're observing it correctly or not? And how is that connected to remembering Ma'amad Har Sinai? So what I would like to do is just backpedal to this issue of adding and subtracting from the Torah. Rambam has a very famous approach to this issue. An approach which he agrees that if you add a rose into the lulav and etrog, that's definitely adding onto the mitzvah, there's no question. Okay? But what is it that the Rambam says? He says, you know what really raises a question? It's the Chachamim. Because we know that the Chachamim, they make all kinds of rules up all the time, They made lots of gezerot, lots of takanot. If you look through the Talmud, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of halachot that the rabbis instituted. and they're binding, and you have to follow them. So the Rambam says, this is in Sefer Shoftim of the Rambam, in Hilchot Mamrim, in the second chapter, towards the end of the second chapter of Hilchot Mamrim, the Rambam says, if so, what is this whole thing of not adding and not subtracting? Didn't the Chachamim read the Torah? It says you're not allowed to add, and then they added all of these halachot. Didn't they notice you're not supposed to do that? So what does the Rambam say? He says, and this is really remarkable what he says. Right, it says, it's all in the wording. It's all in the wording. If the Chachamim get up tomorrow and say, you're not allowed to have chicken with milk, let's say, we don't eat chicken with milk. Right, you're not allowed to cook chicken with milk, but it's only rabbinic. So if the Chachamim came out and said, the Torah really means you're not allowed to have chicken with milk, then that's Bal Tosif, they're adding on to the Torah. But if the Chachamim come along and say, no, the Torah means only beef, only meat, regular meat with milk. Chicken isn't included, but we say you have to also not eat chicken with milk. Oh, that's okay. That's not adding. So wait a second. It's all about semantics then, right? It's all about spin. If they decide to tell you the truth, I call that just lying or telling the truth, right? If they're telling the truth, that's very good. We consider telling the truth a good thing. If they're lying, then it's all of a sudden it becomes Bal Tosif. But really, Tachlis, right? The bottom line is it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing. They're giving you an extra rule. You're not allowed to eat chicken with milk. What difference does it make if they say it's Deoraita, Derabanan, if they don't say anything? What difference does it make? Or let's say, for example, they say, actually what the Torah means when it says Lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo, actually when it says don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, it's literal. You're only not allowed to cook an animal in its own mother's milk. But we, the rabbis, hereby legislate that you can't cook any meat in milk. Is that true? No, it's not. It's not true. Not true. Really, all meat and milk is not allowed by the Torah. That's what it literally says in the Torah is, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. But it means to say any kid in any mother's milk. Okay? Not just that one with its own mother. Okay? So from the Torah, all meat and milk is not allowed. If the Chachamim come and say, or let's say the Chachamim came along and said, really, the Torah says you only have to have 3 minim in the lulav. Only lulav, etrog, and hadas. But we decided in order to help the aravot farmers, we're going to add, not that they would do that, but we're adding on the 4th min. That's not true. You didn't add it on. It was in there already. It had to be there already. That would be, the Rambam says, lo tigra. That's subtracting from the mitzvah. In other words, you're doing the same mitzvah that you were doing before, but you think that part of it is not really from the Torah. You think that the aravot are only rabbinic. You think that the hadassim are only rabbinic. You think that one of the parashiyot in the tefillin is only rabbinic. It's about what you think. It's not about. It's about what they tell you. It's not about what they legislate.
So they actually have to say, you only need the 3 minim, but we're adding the 4th one, or can they come out and say, you only need 3 minim? And then just forget it, the 4th one, not necessary.
Well, if they did that, they would just be telling.
Just do 3, and then if they say that, is that?
You mean if they said we make a legislation, you don't do that? Well, they can't. Sometimes they will do, like, let's say, for example, on Rosh Hashanah we don't blow the shofar, even though the Torah says you have to blow the shofar. How can we not do it? Oh, sometimes the Chachamim will say you don't do it, and then we follow what the Chachamim say, even though it's going against the Torah. So sometimes we do that. But they're not allowed to permanently change a mitzvah. What they can do is they can add, and in subtracting, you see how the Rambam gets around the problem that we mentioned before. Because the Rambam says you're always doing the complete mitzvah. It's just about what you think you're doing, not about what you're actually doing. So, like we said before, if you only shake 3 of the minim, you didn't subtract from the mitzvah, you just didn't do the mitzvah. But if you shake all 4 minim, but the Chachamim tell you that 4th min is actually not required from the Torah, and they legislated it, now they're involved in subtracting from the Torah. They're subtracting from the Torah because they subtracted that from the Torah. So the question, of course, is, why is this not just an issue of telling the truth? Why is this subtracting and adding? Why is it the words that matter? So I think what the answer is that what adding and subtracting, the Rambam is saying, when you add and subtract, what's the real problem with adding and subtracting? The problem with adding and subtracting isn't that there's more stuff that you have to do or more stuff that you're not allowed to do. That's not the problem. That's not the issue. The issue is doing violence to the concept that the Torah wants to teach. If you distort the concept that the Torah wants to teach by either saying that it includes more than it really does, or by saying that it includes less than it really does. Like if you would say that the Torah really means you're not allowed to eat chicken with milk. So now you're actually distorting what the Torah was trying to teach you with that mitzvah. It didn't really include chicken and milk. So your concept of the mitzvah is now distorted. Or if they told you, no, it really only meant the baby animal with its own mother's milk, but we expanded it. So now you're not getting the actual message the Torah wanted to send. That's the problem with adding and subtracting, is that it distorts the message of the Torah because it gets jumbled with other concepts, or its concept becomes twisted in some way. It's about the learning of the mitzvah according to the Rambam. So of course, if you shake a lulav that has more parts in it than it's supposed to, you're also doing Bal Tosif because you innovated your own concept of the mitzvah that includes something that the Torah did not include. But the Rambam sees it as a problem in concept. The performance is a problem because it reveals a problem in concept, that you change the concept of the Torah, whatever that concept is, whatever that idea is for how the mitzvah is supposed to be formulated. You messed around with the formula. And by messing around with the formula, that's really the problem. It's not what you do or don't do as much as what you think, how you understand the mitzvah. And now we can see, how would this connect to, why does Rashi connect this really to Ma'amad Har Sinai? We can see that Rashi has a good point. That it connects to Ma'amad Har Sinai. Why? Because what happens when you start adding or subtracting to the concepts of the Torah? If you add and subtract to the legislation of the Torah, we can understand. Let's say the Chachamim come and say, all right, we want you to do 100 blasts of the shofar, not just 9. Why? Because it will increase the impact of the blowing of the shofar. But everybody knows that you only need 9 in order to fulfill the mitzvah. You don't need 100. Okay? Even 100 you don't need them. That's just a minhag. But I'm just using that as an example. Okay? The Chachamim will come along and say, we want more blasts because it'll have a greater impact. They're allowed to say that. What they're not allowed to say is the Torah said that. Because then they're messing around with what the Torah tells you. So adding behaviors, changing them, modifying, expanding rules is okay in behavior. But if they distort the concept, it's not okay. Why? No, the Rambam would say the same thing in your because personally you can't do it either. He just introduces the concept on the Bet Din level. Because we are not usually responsible for defining what the ideas of the Torah are for the people.
How would a person do that?
So if you decided one day, I really like a certain parasha in the Torah. Ve'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elohecha sho'el me'imach. It's very beautiful. So I've decided to add that into my tefillin because really my idea of tefillin is it should be very inspiring to me with parashiyot that are meaningful to me. So I'm going to put in my mezuzah a different parasha. I don't want to put Vayayim Shemo. It's very negative. It talks about being thrown out of the land and all these things. I don't want that. I want an inspiring, positive thing. So I'm going to put a different concept. But that's not the concept of the Torah. You can put that's your concept. So when you put in that thing, it's not the behavior that you're doing that's necessarily the worst thing. What the worst thing is that you're diluting or distorting what the Torah is trying to teach you. Because instead of trying to understand what the Torah actually told you to do, you put in your own ideas. And by putting in your own ideas, now you're losing the message.
I just made it clear. Isn't that what the Chachamim do all the time? Isn't that what the job of the Chachamim is? To explain to us what the Torah...
Right, so if they do a bad job, in other words, they can make lots of rules to protect us from violating the Torah. Or they can make rules to help bolster what the Torah's message is supposed to be. But if they change what the actual formula of the mitzvah is and say, this is the real formula, our formula is the real formula, instead of distinguishing between what they added to help you and what the Torah's core message is, then you're going to miss the point. So for example, on Shabbat we have a concept of melechet machashevet. That in order that melacha has to be of a certain, with certain kavanah, with certain awareness, for a constructive purpose and all those rules. And if it's done even with a shinui, it's only derabanan. Now if I told you that doing melacha with a shinui is really asur mideoraita, then I'm taking away from what the Torah actually taught you in the mitzvah of Shabbat, which is that only something done in the normal way is really a violation of Shabbat. And there's a reason why the Torah says that. Now, whatever the reason is, we don't want to go into, but there's a reason why. Now, the Chachamim couldn't live with that, because that would mean that everybody would be doing melachot with the back of their hand, and there would be no Shabbat. And then eventually people would just end up violating Shabbat straight away. They didn't want that to happen, so they didn't let you do things with a shinoi. But if they told you, actually the Torah prohibits it, so now you're not going to learn whatever the Torah is trying to teach you by formulating it the way that it did to begin with. You understand what I mean? And that's really the problem of lo tosif. It's a problem of limud Torah. That's why it's here. When it says that you have to learn it. Ushmartem va'asitem. You learn it and you do it. So, yes?
You mean to tell me that the Rambam is of the opinion that if I think I'm doing, let's say for example, chicken and meat and chicken and milk.
Right.
If I think that's a biblical prohibition, then I'm over the.
Because you didn't institute it. If the Chachamim promulgated it as this is what it is, it's deoraita, they're violating it. You wouldn't have that because you're just following the rules of the Chachamim.
Yeah,
You don't necessarily know. But they're the ones who defined it.
Right now.
So if right now you decided, I'm going to take upon myself that I also don't eat potato chips with milk. Or something like that. So then, that would be Baal Tosif of your own.
But just not knowing the difference between the biblical and the rabbinical.
You're not knowing it wouldn't matter. What were you going to say, Sean?
I'm not sure. I think what he's asking, but if I today say chicken and milk, I myself come and say chicken and milk is the right thing. I'm not eating it because it's a sort from the Torah.
Right.
I over about to see. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Right. Now, I don't think that would come on. Even the Rambam wouldn't say that is, because you didn't institute that. You didn't institute that rule. In other words, it's the person who actually added the rule who's responsible for clarifying what its status is. Just because you don't know it doesn't matter.
Before the Chachamim came along, it wasn't clear what's the right thing.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends what their Masorah was. Their Masorah was, in certain things very clear, in certain things not. Well, there's a machloket tanaim whether chicken and milk is deoraita. First of all, there is a tana that holds it. That's just the example that the Rambam gives. Wow.
If Chachamim had instituted chicken and milk as deoraita,
right.
You're saying it would have been over.
If they had known that it wasn't, but they thought that they should give that in order to make it more serious in the eyes of people by saying it's deoraita, then that would be Baal Tosif, according to the Rambam. If you add something now your kavanah matters because you're the one adding it. You come up and say, I decided that you have to wear 17 pairs of tefillin. Or whatever. You add something. But you notice, what does the Rambam not include in Baal Tosif? What does he not include? Some very obvious things. Well, that's true. Making totally new mitzvot. What about reading the Megillah? Right? What about the Nerod Chanukah? So the Ramban actually brings that up. He says that I think that if the people add a totally new mitzvah, it's also Baal Tosif. Because the way that Baal Tosif is normally mentioned is adding into a pre-existent mitzvah. Right? You add into a pre-existent mitzvah. That there are 613 mitzvot, and you go and tinker with one of the mitzvot to make it quote-unquote better. Right? That's the whole problem, because Torah Hashem Tamimah. If a person tinkers with the mitzvah, he's saying, I know better than the Torah. The Torah wanted it this way, but I think it should be the different way. So the person's distorting the concept of the Torah and replacing it with his own concept. So that's doing violence to the purity and the perfection of the Torah. It's implying that the Torah's mitzvot are not perfect. Okay? Now, that's the problem. So the Ramban says the same would be true if somebody added a mitzvah, because aren't they saying the same thing? They're saying that the 613 mitzvot of the Torah are not enough. We need one more. We need one more mitzvah to make it complete. So therefore a person comes along and makes another. And he says that's why the Chachamim were so bothered by the problem of how can we add Ner Chanukah, how can we add Mikra Megillah? They had to find a pasuk to justify it, because they felt that even adding on to the Torah system as a whole, another mitzvah is a problem. Whereas most of the sources focus on adding it into an existing mitzvah. Okay, adding a totally new mitzvah, it's clear the Chachamim added that mitzvah. It's not changing a mitzvah that existed already. Changing a mitzvah that existed already is the problem. So let's come back to the problem that led us to this, which is, so how are the nations of the world going to know whether we're doing the mitzvot right or not? They're going to look and see whether we remembered the mitzvot or not. They're going to know Hilchot Shabbat and say, oh, actually, that's incorrect. They're going to know what's a Deoraita and what's the Rabbanan. How are the nations of the world going to know? So I would like to suggest...
It's different sects are doing different things.
That's also true. That's a problem even we have today, even when we try to keep the Torah. But it's even more than that, which is when people, like the Rashi says, you will be seen as Chachamim and Nivonim when you do it correctly. Why? Because it will be clear that what you're doing is something intelligent. In other words, when the nations of the world see what Torah is as something intelligent, something that's rational, something that's thought through, something that's deep, something that's principled, they can recognize that. And when a person's just doing a jumble of different practices that have no rhyme or reason, nobody knows what's Deoraita, what's the Rabbanan, nobody knows what's really, what comes under one category and what comes under another category. It's no different than any other culture. Every culture has a whole bunch of thousands of different practices that they follow. And and different superstitions and different taboos and different rituals that they follow. What makes the Torah different is that it's based upon a very deep chokhmah. You can't just add anything in. You can't just alter anything. Why? Because the principles and the concept behind the mitzvah are so sacred and they're so deep that even the Chachamim won't mess with them. If they have to add something, they have to make a very clear delineation between what they're adding and what's already there. Otherwise, they're going to diminish the harmony and the order of the principles of the Torah. So when people see, it's not that they know what Hilchot Shabbat, they know what Hilchot Tefillin, they don't know any of this stuff. But when they see that the Jews are observing Torah as a type of chokhmah, it's a type of wisdom, it's intelligent, it's something that is distinguishable from all the other religions in the world. Because it's not just based upon impulse or instinct or emotion, but it's something that has profound chokhmah behind it. They're going to recognize that. They don't have to know the details to recognize that. And they can also recognize when someone's just making stuff up as they go along. Like, let's say, the conservative and reform, who just kind of make rules up as they go along, or they make traditions up as they go along, and they add some here, and they subtract some here, and everybody looks at it and says, this is a religion like any other religion. They add when they want, they change when they want, they do whatever feels good at a certain time, they allow this, they don't allow that, and the rules look arbitrary. They can tell when it looks arbitrary. And they can tell when it's not arbitrary. They can tell when it's done with chokhmah and with principle, and they can tell when it's done in a random and disorganized manner, and it's based upon impulse, which is what most of the other sects of Judaism do. They go by their by their heart. They feel something should be a certain way. They change it. They feel something, it's really not right that we don't let a Kohen marry a divorced woman because, it's mean. I mean, why are we discriminating against divorced women? And maybe this Kohen really is in love with her, so, we should let it go. What kind of a system of wisdom is that you just have a feeling that you woke up one morning and you decided to change it? So people see, that's, this religion is not of any substance. But when people see that there's a deep chokhmah, and that even whatever is added or whatever is subtracted is based on, is clearly organized and formulated, and everything is wisdom from top to bottom, they can recognize that. They can see that. And they say, Rak am chacham benavon hagoy hagadol hazeh, even though we don't know the details. We don't know that, but we see that this is the people that's based on chokhmah. That this is the people that are based on wisdom. And that's their foundation, and that's what they're doing. And that's why it's so important for the Chachamim not to let Judaism disintegrate into thousands and thousands of different rituals. And that's why it was so important for Harambam, for instance, to write the Mishneh Torah in particular. Actually, Shmuel ibn Tibon says in the beginning of the Sefer HaMitzvot, he says that one of the great things about the Rambam's book of Mishneh Torah is that it shows you the wisdom of Torah. Why? Because you see it's organized. That in the end, everything falls into place in a harmonious way. Everything's organized, everything is delineated, everything is clear. It's not just a hodgepodge of a million different rules and regulations and rituals. And that's what reveals to you the deep chokhmah of the Torah that we have. And that's what takes us back to, we're not doing our Torah. That's why it's reminding us of Har Sinai. Because if we add or subtract from the Torah, we're not keeping the mitzvah of Hashem. We're not keeping the Torah of Hashem. We're keeping our own Torah. It's only when we're true to the Torah that was given to us that we're really keeping the Torah of Hashem. And that's why it's so important to make sure that we don't develop a blurriness or a lack of clarity about the mitzvot that we do. That we have an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what's the Oraita, and what's the Rabbanan, so that we make sure that in our understanding of Torah is very clear. Because when our understanding of Torah is clear, then our practice of Torah manifests that. Our practice of Torah shows when our understanding of Torah is deep. And people, even who don't know anything about Judaism, will be able to recognize that, and it's a Kiddush Hashem. And that's what the Torah is.